I have been planning on preaching this particular lesson even before I got sick, but we now get to give it. In Proverbs 4:23, and most of our verses will come from Proverbs, keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. You are whatever is in your heart. Make what's in your heart what God is pleased with. What type of heart do you want? What type of heart do you have? In Matthew 18 through 20, Jesus said this, but the things which proceed out of the heart come forth, but the things which proceed out of the mouth come forth out of the heart, and they defile the man. For out of the heart come forth evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thieves, false witness, railings. These are the things which defile the man, not the food that he eats. As I looked around and I was interested, I found about 6 animals that had 6 different kinds of hearts. One of them was the whale. He's got a heart bigger than Casey's big car. That's amazing. But I found the squid. The squid has 3 hearts. Think of a heart for God, for your neighbor, and for your family, for yourself. And then I saw that you had the earthworm. The earthworm does not have a heart. Sounds like a lot of brethren, doesn't it? And then you have the frog. The frog's heart, the wood frog, his heart completely stops when it's freezing and he's in hibernation. He will not start beating his heart again until he thaws out, about an hour after he thaws out. Some hearts need to be thawed out. So we have some special things in the animal world that we don't think about sometimes. Well, the Bible speaks of some special things, and the Bible speaks of how special the Bible heart is in contrast to the physical heart. As we look at the book of Proverbs, we'll take notice of these things as the wise man would give us a great deal of good instructions. We won't forget what Jesus said, and we'll turn to him again in a moment. One type of heart is filled with goodness. This particular heart is characterized as, first of all, Proverbs 15:15, a cheerful heart. All the days are afflicted, all the days of the afflicted are evil. But he that is of a cheerful heart hath a continual feast. Now, when you see the word but in a proverb, recognize that that's contrasting the first part with the second part. And so what you can do, you can take the verbs and the nouns and you can simply find what's the opposite in the other text. So we have this, the days of the afflicted, in contrast to the cheerful heart. The days of the afflicted are evil, in contrast to a continual feast. Now, most of the time, most people, when they think of evil, think of moral evil, spiritual evil, terrible, terrible, bad people. That's not what is meant by this. It's the opposite of the feast. When you think of the feast, you're thinking of the total enjoyment that you have if you have a cheerful heart. Well, if you have a evil heart, it has the pain and the ruin and the harm that come along with the afflicting the heart that's not cheerful. We take notice of Luke chapter 10, verse 38 and 42, and we have a small inkling of a young lady's heart that wasn't quite right, and so she harmed herself. In Luke chapter 10, verse 38, it came to pass that Jesus went to the house of Mary and Martha and Lazarus. Martha received him into her house, and she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet. Mary is at the Lord's feet and heard his word, but Martha was cumbered about with much serving. She came up to him and she said, Lord, dost thou not care that my sister leave me to serve alone? Bid her therefore that she help me. She had an afflicted heart instead of a cheerful heart. Martha, Martha, thou art anxious and troubled about many things. But one thing is needful, for Mary hath chosen the good part, which shall not be taken away from her. Spiritually needed, her heart, Martha's heart, need to be spiritually honed. We take notice also as we see this cheerful heart, Proverbs 17:22. Proverbs 17:22. A cheerful heart is good medicine, but a broken spirit drieth up the bones. I've told you a number of times about the Good Sister in Owasso. I tell you because it's an outstanding example of how people can affect other people. A cheerful heart is good medicine. Well, there's something that is rottenness of the bones, and it's the opposite of cheerfulness. I was called to the hospital by her family. When I entered the room was dark. There were 8 or so people in that room. I don't know, it could have been a dozen. And they were full of gloom and doom. The world was going to end. Well, the good sister from the congregation where I worshiped and preached, she was crying out, Ron, Ron, they're burying me. I'm being buried. And the family was full of consternation. What's going on? She's laying in her hospital bed. Why is she thinking and hallucinating the way that she is? Well, the family was full of gloom and doom. And the first thing that came to the good sister's mind was the gloom of doom of dying and being buried alive. Those things reached one to the other. I remember a number of years ago, my mother was sick in the hospital. I would not go in the hospital room unless I could hold a cheerful thought in mind. I called attention to others that when you go into the hospital, there'll be no crying, there'll be no tears, there'll be no sadness. You exude positiveness. And they all, I think, did a good job. They did a good job of taking care of my mother. So we can see that what can happen is that when you go into a hospital room, be careful. I remember a number of decades ago, maybe 10 or 15 decades, that's 150. That's as much as Social Security recipients. So we saw that Jerry Brewer, his brother was in the hospital in Oklahoma City, and we lived in Yukon. So I knew he was going to be at the hospital at a certain time. So I met him there. We went upstairs, and before we went into the room, I looked in and saw that it was dark. I said, Jerry, turn on the lights, open the window shades, and be cheerful, even though your brother is dying. He was. He did an outstanding job with his little brother. He would hug him, and he would call his name, and he would say, remember when we would? And he would tell him stories that they were a part of that were cheerful to that brother and cheerful to Jerry as well. He did not exude sadness and gloom. We have a second heart that is depicted for us in Proverbs 15:14. It's the discerning heart. By the way, when the Bible teaches that you can have a discerning heart, it means that some do not have a discerning heart. But here's what the wise man said. The heart of him, the heart of him that understanding seeketh knowledge, but the mouth of fools feedeth on folly. Garbage in, garbage out. The fool, because he eats on folly, he feeds on folly, and he's going to be full of folly. You have a third heart, and that's the happy heart. In Proverbs 15:13, a glad, happy heart maketh a cheerful countenance, but by sorrow of heart, the spirit is broken. So you have a discerning heart. You have a heart that is full of gladness and happiness. Furthermore, Proverbs 14:30, you have a peaceful heart. The wise man would say a tranquil heart is the life of the flesh. What does he mean by that? Whenever you are at peace with yourself and at peace with God, especially at peace with God, then it's a lot easier to live in this flesh than otherwise. But envy is the rottenness of the bones. I've told you this story again. Some of the stories I tell you, I love these illustrations because they illustrate Bible truth so well with true life. Here's a good analogy. What's it like in your town? There was an old man. He was wise, and he was sitting on the porch one day at a gas station. He had his granddaughter with him, young granddaughter, and they were passing the time ever so slowly. At one time, a particular gentleman, a tourist in town, a stranger, walked up and said to the elderly gentleman, "So what kind of town is this that we're in?" The older gentleman slowly turned to the individual and replied, and he said, "Well, what kind of town are you from?" The gentleman, the tourist, responded, and he said, "In the town I'm from, everybody's critical of each other. The neighbors all gossip about everyone. It's a real negative place to live. I'm sure glad to be leaving it. It's not a very cheerful place." To which the old man in the chair responded to the stranger and said, "You know, that's just how our town is." An hour or so went by, and a family drove up. And they stopped and they got him some gas and a few other things. And they got to talking to the elderly gentleman. The two little children and the mother jumped out and they were listening to the elderly gentleman. The father stepped out of the car and he also asked the gentleman, "Is this town a pretty good town to live in?" The old man in the chair replied and said, "Well, what about the town you're from? How's it?" The father said, "Well, in the town I'm from, everybody is very close, always willing to lend their neighbor a helping hand. There's always a hello, a thank you everywhere you go. I really hate to leave. I feel almost like we're leaving family." The older gentleman said, "You know, that's a lot like our small town." After the family was gone, the little granddaughter, "Grandfather, Grandpa, how come when the first gentleman came and asked you about the town, you told him it was terrible? The second gentleman came and you told him it was a wonderful place. How come?" Smart, wise grandpa said, "No matter where you move, you take your own attitude with you, and that's what makes it terrible or wonderful." The wise man said, "Peaceful heart, happy heart, discerning heart." We go further and we take notice the type of heart that we like, even if you are king, is a pure heart. Proverbs 20, verse 9. Who can say, "I have made my heart clean, I am pure from my sin"? Proverbs 22:11. He that loveth pureness of heart, for the grace of his lips, the king will be his friend. I'll tell you, I'm glad he used the idea of a king because we have seen times in which the ruler and his staff are deceitful and they are backbiters. If you're not going to stand up for the man whenever you are working for him, do not stand against him when you leave the job. Too many people have left a particular gentleman's request to work with him and written books in order to lambast him. You do not want a deceitful, rude backstabber as a part of your friends. But if you find one who is pure in heart, he will not do that. Sixthly, we have trusting hearts. Proverbs 3, verse 5 through 6, trust in Jehovah with all thy heart. Proverbs 3, 5 and 6. And lean not upon thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he will direct thy paths. If we will trust God, we will let God guide us. Now, don't misunderstand the wise man. He's not saying that you're going to be supernaturally zapped and you're going to know how to walk life. That's just not the way it is. Oh, God told me how to pay my bills. God told me that what hospital I need to go to. God told me that I need to marry this woman. No, he didn't. Don't blame it on God. You did that. Proverbs 10, verse 8. The wise in heart will receive commandments, but a prating fool shall fall. Adam Clarke, he says of that particular passage, the wise man will receive the commandment, but the shallow, babbling fool shall be cast down. I don't think he minces words, does he? Seventh, the wise heart. Proverbs 16:21. The wise in heart shall be called prudent, and the sweetness of the lips increaseth learning. Proverbs 23:15. My son, and by the way, whenever you see my son, that means somebody's addressing his son. Son, probably in instruction. Commentators would say that this is a teacher talking to a student. My son, if thy heart be wise, my heart will be glad. And so it is whenever we see a young man that we, as preachers and teachers, have taught and helped, and they become preachers. I'm thinking of Timotheus Bowman, one great young man. I've called him time and time again. He was taught by his parents first, and they're the ones that truly led him properly. But I was a little bit of help, and he turned out to be a fine, fine gentleman. Let me conclude in Matthew chapter 12, verse 34 through 37. Ye offspring of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. The good man out of his good treasure bringeth forth good things. That's the good heart. And the evil man out of his evil treasure bringeth forth evil things. I say unto you that every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give account thereof in the day of judgment. For by thy words thou shalt be justified, and by thy words thou shalt be condemned, and by thy heart those things shall come out. If you're not a child of God, it would be good to understand and seek to have a pure heart before God. If you're not a Christian and you're of the age of accountability, your heart is not right. You need to make it right by cleansing it in the blood of Jesus Christ, trusting in God, listening to him as he says, he that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. Trusting in him as he would say, confess Jesus as Lord. Trusting in him when he would say, except you repent, you shall all in like manner perish. And then in Revelation, he would say, be thou faithful unto death.